At 9:17 on a Thursday morning, my son parked my wheelchair inside a nursing home that smelled like bleach, old soup, and abandonment. He bent down, kissed the top of my head like a good son, and whispered 6 words into my ear. "You'll be safer here, Dad." Then my daughter placed a scratchy folded blanket over my knees and said, "It's only until you recover." But I saw the truth before either of them finished lying. Marcus had my house keys in his pocket. Evelyn had already stopped calling it my home. And the one thing they refused to mention was my drafting table. The old oak table where I had kept every blueprint, deed, and structural record that mattered. I did not argue. I did not cry. I sat in that aluminum wheelchair, still recovering from severe spinal surgery, and looked at the 2 children I had spent my entire life providing for. They thought the surgery had made me weak. They thought the wheelchair had made me helpless. But I was an architect, and an architect knows the difference between a place built for healing and a place built to make people disappear. Marcus, at 45, was wearing a suit that was a little too tight, projecting the false confidence of a realtor who hadn't closed a legitimate deal in 3 years. Evelyn, 42, was dressed in beige cashmere, checking her designer watch every 30 seconds, as if the air in the facility was contaminating her. They had brought me to the Shady Pines Rehabilitation Center. That was the name on the brochure. But I had spent 50 years learning how to read a building. I looked at the peeling linoleum floors, the flickering fluorescent lights in the hallway, and the understaffed nurses pushing squeaking carts of medication. This wasn't a rehabilitation center. This was a warehouse for the dying. It was the cheapest facility they could find that still legally qualified as medical care. A man in a wheelchair does not need 12 rooms. Marcus said, patting my shoulder again. It sounded like a line he had rehearsed in the mirror. "You need around-the-clock care. The house needs to be aired out. We're just being practical." I looked past Marcus, my eyes settling on Evelyn. "Which room did you put my drafting table in?" I asked quietly. Evelyn avoided my gaze. She looked down at her expensive leather purse, her jaw tightening. We stored it safely. Dad, don't worry about the house. Just focus on getting better." They turned around and walked down the long, bleak hallway, their footsteps echoing against the cheap drywall. I watched them go, waiting for one of them to look back. Neither of them did. 42 days later, neither of them had come back. Not once. Not for my first physical therapy review, which was cancelled because my children hadn't actually paid for the rehabilitation package. Not for my 72nd birthday, which came and went without a single phone call. Not even when the night nurse called them at 2 in the morning to tell them I had fallen in the bathroom, trying to reach the sink alone, bruising 3 of my ribs. Marcus had let it go to voicemail. Evelyn had sent a text the next afternoon, asking if I needed an aspirin. For 42 days, I sat in a small, suffocating room with a window that was permanently painted shut. The only person who still said goodnight to me was a nurse who was not paid enough to care that much. But I am not a man who gives up easily. I spent 50 years as a senior architect. I designed courthouses, library wings, and luxury estates. I spent my entire career solving structural failures. On the 43rd morning, I decided it was time to inspect my own foundation. I waited until the early hours of the morning. When the facility was quiet, I asked the night nurse, a young woman named Elena, if she could bring me my old leather drafting case from the closet. She placed it gently on my lap. Inside, tucked beneath my mechanical pencils and drafting triangles, was my personal tablet. I connected to the facility's slow Wi-Fi. I didn't check my email. I didn't look at social media. I logged directly into the county assessor's property filing screen. I typed in the address. The Whitmore house, it was the $3 million Victorian estate I had bought when it was practically a ruin. I had restored it by hand, blueprint by blueprint, stripping the rot, reinforcing the joists, and bringing it back to life alongside my late wife, Margaret. It was the house where Marcus had learned to walk. It was the house where Evelyn had learned to paint. The screen loaded. The digital property record appeared in harsh blue light. I stared at the screen, my heart turning to absolute ice in my chest. The deed had been touched. A preliminary mortgage application had been filed just 3 weeks after they dropped me off at the nursing home. It wasn't a standard loan. It was a massive $1. $2 million commercial construction line of credit, listed under a new limited liability corporation registered to Marcus and Evelyn. The property was no longer listed as a private residence. It was actively being rezoned as a future event venue development. And beside the authorization line, granting full legal collateralization of the estate, was a digital signature that looked almost exactly like mine. Almost they had used a power of attorney document I had signed 5 years ago, a springing instrument that was only legally valid if I was declared mentally incapacitated. To activate it, they must have found a doctor willing to sign a fraudulent capacity concern note, claiming I was cognitively unreliable after my surgery. My children had not just abandoned me, they had legally erased me. They thought I was rotting away in a cheap nursing home, too weak to fight back, while they used the house I built to fund their failing careers and fake luxury lifestyles. They had turned my legacy into their personal ATM. I did not shout. I did not call my children to scream at them. I closed the tablet, the soft click echoing in the dark, silent room. I opened the lower compartment of my drafting case and pulled out a rolled-up set of heavy, blue architectural prints. They were the original master blueprints for the Whitmore house. Marcus and Evelyn had made one fatal mistake. They thought they had locked an old man away from his house. They thought they had stolen the keys, changed the locks, and secured the asset. They forgot that the house had been designed by that old man. I unrolled the heavy paper, the smell of old ink and drafting vellum filling the sterile air of the nursing home. I traced my finger over the structural load-bearing walls, the reinforced foundation, and the intricate roofline. An architect learns one rule very early in his career. If the foundation is rotten, you do not decorate the walls. You do not try to paint over the cracks. You tear the whole thing down. And every building I ever designed had a demolition plan. If you live long enough, you realize that true cruelty rarely comes from strangers. It comes from the people who know exactly where your weak points are and who decide to push on them anyway. My children had abandoned me, but they hadn't left me completely alone. They had left me in the care of the Shady Pines night staff. In a facility like that, the staff is divided into 2 categories. The people who have completely surrendered to the crushing depression of the environment, and the people who are too exhausted to realize they should quit. Elena belonged to the second category. She was 29 years old, a night shift registered nurse who worked 80-hour weeks and always looked like she was running on 3 hours of sleep and stale coffee. But despite her exhaustion, she was the only person in that building who treated me like a human being instead of a decaying asset. Most of the daytime nurses treated the elderly patients like toddlers. They spoke in loud, slow, patronizing voices. They called me Henry, stripping away the professional respect I had spent 50 years earning. They would drop a plastic tray of lukewarm food on my rolling table and disappear for 4 hours. But Elena was different. The first night she took over my rotation, she walked into my room, checked my vitals, and noticed that my glasses were smudged. She didn't just ignore it. She took a clean microfiber cloth from her pocket, gently wiped the lenses, and handed them back to me. "Is the temperature okay in here, Mr. Whitmore?" she had asked, her voice quiet and respectful. Mr. Whitmore, not Henry, not Sweetie or Honey. Mr. Whitmore. "It's a bit drafty," I replied, surprised by her basic decency. Elena nodded, grabbed a second blanket from the supply closet, and carefully tucked it around my shoulders. Over the next few weeks, she became the only tether I had to the outside world. She was the one who brought me hot chamomile tea at 2 in the morning when the pain in my spine kept me awake. She was the one who found my favorite drafting pen when it rolled under the bed. One evening, while checking my blood pressure, she looked at the complex, hand-drawn architectural sketches I had been working on in my notebook. "These are incredible," Elena said, her tired eyes lighting up with genuine curiosity. "What did you use to do, Mr. Whitmore?" I looked up from the notebook. "I spent 50 years teaching buildings how to stand," she smiled softly. "It looks like you were very good at it." "I was," I said. "But I seem to have done a poor job designing my own retirement." The reality of my situation was humiliating, and my children had made sure the humiliation was thoroughly documented. A few days after my fall in the bathroom, the facility manager, a sharply dressed, aggressively pragmatic woman named Brenda Cole, came into my room to discuss my care plan. Brenda was the kind of administrator who viewed patients entirely as billing codes. She stood at the foot of my bed, holding a clipboard. "Mr. Whitmore, we need to discuss your physical therapy schedule," Brenda said, her tone brisk. "The daytime staff noted that you have been requesting daily private mobility sessions." "I need to walk, Brenda," I said evenly. "I am recovering from spinal surgery. If I don't undergo aggressive physical therapy, the muscle atrophy will become permanent." "My surgeon mandated daily sessions," Brenda sighed, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "I understand what your surgeon recommended, but your children, who hold your medical proxy and manage your finances, selected the standard recovery care package when they admitted you." "Meaning what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Meaning you are only approved for group therapy sessions twice a week," Brenda said flatly. "Private, daily sessions are an out-of-pocket expense. We reached out to your son Marcus to authorize the upgrade, but he declined. He stated that the standard care was sufficient for your current lifestyle needs." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Marcus wasn't just abandoning me. He was actively denying me the medical care necessary to walk again, likely to ensure I remained trapped in this wheelchair, safely out of his way. "My children placed me here under the guise of rehabilitation, correct?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Brenda looked uncomfortable. She shifted her weight, defaulting to the empty, corporate rhetoric of nursing home administration. "Families make difficult choices, Mr. Whitmore. Nursing care is expensive. We have to work within the parameters they set." I stared at her, my eyes narrowing. "No, Brenda, families make visits. Accountants make parameters." Brenda didn't have a response to that. She gave a tight, awkward smile and quickly left the room. I didn't realize that Elena had been standing in the hallway, listening to the entire exchange. When she came in later that night to give me my medication, she looked at me with a profound, heartbreaking pity. She didn't say anything, but she spent an extra 10 minutes adjusting my pillows and making sure my water pitcher was full. A few nights later, I woke up around 3 in the morning. The room was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of the hallway light bleeding under the door. I turned my head and saw Elena sitting at the small visitor's desk in the corner of my room. She was on her break, and she had fallen asleep, her head resting on her folded arms. In front of her, an old, battered laptop was open. I reached for my glasses on the nightstand, put them on, and squinted at the glowing screen. It was a financial portal. At the top of the screen, in bold red letters, was a student loan balance, $82,415. Beneath it was a notification that her forbearance period had ended, and the next monthly payment of $950 was overdue. I looked at Elena. She was exhausted. She was drowning in debt. She was working the worst shift in a miserable facility, likely taking extra hours just to keep her head above water. And yet she had never once complained to me. She had never mentioned her financial struggles. She hadn't asked for a dime, nor had she ever tried to manipulate my sympathies. She just wiped my glasses, brought me tea, and treated me with the dignity my own children had stripped away. Suddenly, Elena shifted in her sleep. Her eyes fluttered open. She blinked, realized where she was, and instantly saw me looking at her laptop screen. Panic flashed across her face. She slammed the laptop shut with a loud clack. "I'm so sorry. Mr. Whitmore." Elena stammered, standing up quickly and smoothing her scrubs. "I shouldn't have fallen asleep in here. I was trying to study for my advanced certification exams. Asterisk. You don't have to apologize, Elena," I said softly. She looked embarrassed, her cheeks flushing red. "I really am sorry. Do you need anything? Water? Pain medication?" "No," I replied, watching her carefully. "I have everything I need." She nodded, grabbed her laptop, and hurried out of the room, ashamed that I had seen the massive weight she was carrying. I laid back against my thin pillows, staring at the ceiling. My children, who stood to inherit a $3 million estate, had dumped me in a warehouse and refused to pay for the physical therapy that would allow me to walk again. A 29-year-old nurse, who owed $82,000 to the government and was working herself into the ground, was the only person who cared if I was cold in the middle of the night. I didn't say anything to Elena about the money. I didn't offer to pay it, not yet. An architect knows that before you build something new, you have to clear the site. I closed my eyes and went back to sleep. I needed my rest, because the next morning I was going to log back into the county records, and I was going to find out exactly how deep my children had dug their own graves. To understand the magnitude of what my children stole, you have to understand what the Whitmore house actually was. It was never just a piece of real estate. It was the only thing in my life I had built purely out of love. I bought the property 40 years ago. At the time, it wasn't a $3 million luxury estate. It was a crumbling, abandoned Victorian shell sitting on 2 acres of overgrown weeds. The roof had caved in, the foundation was settling unevenly, and the original hardwood floors were warped from decades of water damage. Most architects would have ordered it demolished. But my wife, Margaret, saw something else. She walked through the damp, rotting rooms, touched the intricate, hand-carved mahogany banister that was completely covered in dust, and said, "We can save it, Henry. It just needs someone to care about it again." And so we saved it. For 10 years, I worked my demanding job at the architectural firm during the day, and at night I came home to restore the house. I reinforced the foundation with my own hands. I milled new floorboards to match the original wood. I ran new electrical lines, updated the plumbing, and rebuilt the collapsed roof. Margaret designed the interior. She spent months carefully choosing the period-accurate wallpaper, restoring the stained glass windows, and planting a massive bed of hydrangeas in the east garden. The house became the physical manifestation of our family. Marcus used to run his die-cast toy cars across the living room floor, tracing the natural grain of the wood. Evelyn used to sit in the sunroom on Sunday afternoons, painting clumsy watercolors of the hydrangeas while her mother watched. When Margaret decided she wanted to take up oil painting, I spent 3 months designing and building a custom, glass-walled studio for her on the west wing of the house, perfectly angled to catch the afternoon light. When Margaret died of breast cancer 15 years ago, a massive piece of my heart died with her. But the house remained. Every room held a memory of her. The house was the only place where I could still feel the warmth of the life we had built together. But as Marcus and Evelyn grew older, their perspective of the house shifted. They stopped seeing the memories. They stopped seeing their mother's hydrangeas or the studio I had built for her. They started seeing an asset. The real estate market boomed, and suddenly, the crumbling Victorian I had bought for practically nothing was appraised at over $3 million. I remember a conversation we had in the kitchen 2 years ago. Right around the time Marcus's real estate development firm started bleeding money, and Evelyn was desperately trying to launch herself as a high-end lifestyle consultant. "Dad, This place is sitting on a ridiculous amount of value, Marcus had said, leaning against the marble counter, holding a glass of scotch. You have thousands of square feet here, just collecting dust. If you leverage the equity, you could pull out a massive amount of cash. I had looked up from my newspaper, frowning. I don't need cash, Marcus. I need a place to live. The house is paid off. Evelyn, who was scrolling through her phone, chimed in without looking up. It could be an incredible luxury venue, Dad. If you just updated the West Wing and stopped treating the place like a shrine, it could generate 6 figures a year in event rentals. I had closed my newspaper, the anger slowly simmering in my chest. It is not a shrine, Evelyn. It is a home. It is the home your mother built. Evelyn finally looked up, her eyes cold and entirely devoid of sentimentality. That's what people say when they don't understand assets, she replied smoothly. I should have known then. I should have realized that my children were looking at me the same way. They were looking at the house as an obstacle preventing them from accessing their inheritance. They couldn't legally force me to sell it, and they couldn't mortgage it themselves because my name was the only one on the deed. But 5 years ago, after a mild health scare involving a brief heart arrhythmia, I had made a terrible mistake. I had gone to my estate attorney and drafted a springing power of attorney. A standard power of attorney grants someone immediate control over your finances. A springing power of attorney is different. It is a dormant legal instrument. It only springs into effect if a specific condition is met, usually if the principal is declared medically incapacitated and unable to manage their own affairs. I had drafted the document naming Marcus and Evelyn as my co-agents, believing that if I ever suffered a massive stroke or developed severe dementia, my children would need the authority to pay my medical bills and manage my care. The document explicitly stated that it could only be activated if 2 independent physicians signed sworn affidavits declaring me cognitively incompetent. I told Marcus and Evelyn where the document was kept in my home office. Safe. I told them it was for emergencies only. I thought I was being a responsible father. I didn't realize I was handing them the murder weapon. When my spine deteriorated and required invasive surgery, it temporarily confined me to a wheelchair. But my mind was perfectly sharp. I was fully capable of managing my own affairs. Marcus and Evelyn didn't care. They saw an opportunity. They realized that if they could physically remove me from the house, isolate me in a cheap nursing home where no one would ask questions, and secure a fraudulent doctor's note claiming the surgery and pain medication had rendered me cognitively unreliable, they could activate the springing power of attorney. Once the POA was active, they would have total, unchecked legal authority to sign my name, mortgage my property, and extract the equity they had been salivating over for years. And that was exactly what they had done. They had used my temporary physical weakness to legally declare me dead while I was still breathing. As I lay in my narrow bed at the Shady Pines Rehabilitation Center, the pieces of the puzzle locked together with terrifying clarity. I knew exactly how they had engineered the fraud. And more importantly, I knew exactly how to dismantle it. I didn't need a medical miracle to walk again. I just needed to call my lawyer. When you spend half a century designing load-bearing structures, you learn how to read the hidden mechanics of a building. You don't look at the paint or the crown molding. You look at the steel girders, the concrete footings, and the stress distribution. Fraud is exactly the same. You don't look at the polished lies. You look at the paperwork. The morning after I discovered Elena's student loan debt, I woke up before sunrise, pulled my tablet from my drafting case, and initiated a deep dive into the county assessor's public records database. I didn't just stop at the preliminary mortgage filing I had seen the day before. I dug into the zoning board applications, the commercial permitting requests, and the limited liability company registrations. I wanted to see the full scope of the architectural crime my children were committing against my legacy. The digital paper trail was extensive, and it was entirely damning. Marcus had registered a new LLC 3 weeks ago, listing himself as the CEO and Evelyn as the creative director. Using the fraudulent springing power of attorney, they had transferred the title of the Whitmore house into a revocable trust under the LLC's control. With the house secured as collateral, they had immediately applied for a $1.2 million commercial construction line of credit through a mid-tier regional bank. The bank, assuming they were dealing with legitimate heirs acting on behalf of a medically incapacitated father, had approved the loan. The construction line was a revolving account, meaning Marcus and Evelyn could draw cash against the $1.2 million limit as the renovations progressed. According to the bank ledger filed with the county clerk, they had already pulled a massive first draw of $350,000. I sat in my wheelchair, staring at the screen as the thin morning light filtered through the dirty window of the nursing home. $350,000. They had taken out a mortgage on a house they didn't own, and they had already spent the first draw before I even knew the paperwork existed. Marcus was likely using the cash to float his failing real estate development firm, while Evelyn was using it to fund her delusion of becoming a high society lifestyle guru. I clicked on the next document in the digital queue. It was an application submitted to the Municipal Zoning Board, requesting a variance to reclassify the residential estate as a commercial property. Attached to the zoning application was a preliminary marketing brochure Evelyn had designed to show the bank her vision. I opened the PDF file. The first page featured a beautifully rendered digital mock-up of the estate's exterior. But the name in the classic embossed font at the top of the page wasn't the Whitmore house. It read *Evelyn House Estate Venue. My daughter hadn't just stolen the physical property. She was actively attempting to erase my entire existence from its history. She was branding it with her own name, treating the decades of manual labor I had poured into the restoration as nothing more than an ugly preamble to her own success. But the marketing brochure wasn't the worst part. I scrolled down to the third page of the PDF. It was a digital floor plan, showcasing the proposed renovations for the luxury event space. As an architect, looking at a poorly designed floor plan is like listening to a symphony played entirely out of tune. Evelyn had drawn the facades herself, and they were a structural nightmare. She had proposed knocking down load-bearing walls in the grand foyer to create an open-concept reception area, completely ignoring the massive weight of the second-story master suite resting directly above it. But it wasn't the structural incompetence that made my blood run cold. It was the West Wing. I zoomed in on the section of the blueprint where I had spent 3 months building the custom, glass-walled painting studio for my late wife. I had designed the roofline specifically to capture the soft, golden afternoon light that Margaret loved so much. It was the room where she had spent the final, peaceful years of her life before the cancer took her. On Evelyn's digital floor plan, the studio was gone. In its place, Evelyn had drawn a massive, sprawling bar area, complete with built-in refrigeration units and high-top cocktail seating. She had labeled the room *the Champagne Lounge. I stopped breathing. The sterile smell of the nursing home faded away, replaced by the phantom scent of Margaret's oil paints and the dried hydrangeas she used to keep in a vase on her desk. Evelyn wasn't just renovating a house. She was systematically erasing the woman who had given birth to her. She wanted to tear out the hardwood floors where her mother had stood for hours, painting the garden. She wanted to shatter the custom glass I had installed with my own calloused hands. She wanted to replace a shrine of love and memory with a cheap, superficial bar where wealthy socialites could drink overpriced champagne and pretend they were cultured. I stared at the words, Champagne Lounge, until the letters blurred on the screen. They had not stolen my house first. They had stolen My wife's room. I closed the PDF. I didn't feel the sharp, frantic sting of betrayal anymore. The shock had completely burned away, leaving behind a cold, absolute, terrifying clarity. I picked up my cell phone from the nightstand. I dialed a number I had known by heart for 20 years. It rang twice before a deep, calm voice answered. Samuel Price.
Attorney at law.
Sam was my estate lawyer. He was a brilliant, ruthless bulldog of a man who had guided my architectural firm through decades of complex commercial litigation. He was the one who had originally drafted the springing power of attorney 5 years ago. Sam, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, carrying the low, dangerous rumble of a storm rolling in over the horizon. It's Henry. Henry. Sam sounded genuinely surprised. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Marcus told me you were completely incapacitated after the surgery. He said you couldn't even speak on the phone. Marcus is an exceptional liar, Sam, I replied. And he is currently using the dormant power of attorney you drafted to systematically dismantle my estate. The line went dead silent. When Sam finally spoke, the friendly surprise in his voice was gone, replaced by the razor-sharp focus of a litigator going to war. Tell me exactly what they did, Sam ordered. I told him everything. I told him about the cheap nursing home, the forged capacity note from the doctor, the $1.2 million construction line, the LLC transfer, and the preliminary demolition plans for the West Wing. Sam listened quietly, the furious scratching of a pen on a legal pad audible in the background. This is massive fraud, Henry, Sam said, his voice tightening with anger. We can file an emergency injunction this morning. We can freeze the title, revoke the power of attorney, and notify the bank that the loan was secured under fraudulent pretenses. We can lock Marcus and Evelyn out of the property by noon. No, I said calmly. Sam paused. No, Henry, they have already pulled a $300,000 draw. If we don't act now, if we file an injunction now, Sam, it becomes a civil dispute, I interrupted. They will claim it was a misunderstanding. They will claim they were trying to protect my assets while I was recovering. I do not want to argue with my children in a courtroom. Then what do you want to do? Sam asked cautiously. I looked down at the rolled-up master blueprint of the Whitmore house resting on my lap. I looked at the intricately drawn lines of the foundation I had poured 40 years ago. Sam, I need 2 things by tomorrow morning, I instructed, my voice cold and hard as steel. I need you to bring an independent physician to the facility to conduct a full, legally binding capacity evaluation to prove I am entirely competent. And then, I need you to find me a buyer. A buyer for the house? Sam asked, confused. Henry, you can't just sell it on the open market if there's a fraudulent lien attached to it. I don't want to sell it on the open market, Sam, I said. I want you to find a commercial land developer. A private equity firm, a corporate holding company. Find someone who will pay $3 million cash for 2 acres of prime real estate in an exclusive zip code. I paused, letting the silence hang on the line before delivering the final fatal requirement. Make sure it is a buyer who does not love old houses, Sam. Make sure it is someone who only wants the dirt underneath the foundation. Sam didn't ask any more questions. He was a smart man. He understood exactly what kind of demolition I was planning. I will see you tomorrow morning, Henry, Sam said softly, and hung up the phone. I placed the phone back on the nightstand. I looked at the peeling wallpaper of the nursing home. Marcus and Evelyn thought they were dealing with a frail old man in a wheelchair. They thought they were dealing with a father who would eventually forgive them because they were blood. They forgot that they were dealing with an architect, and an architect knows that the fastest way to fix a corrupted structure is to bring in the bulldozers. While Samuel Price was quietly laying the legal groundwork to sever my children from my estate, Marcus and Evelyn were busy celebrating their theft. They didn't just quietly misappropriate the loan funds. They wanted an audience. They wanted the entire city to see that they had finally ascended to the top of the real estate and design world, using my house as their stepping stone. 2 days after I spoke with Sam, my children hosted an event they aggressively marketed as the Whitmore House Restoration launch. They hired a high-end catering company, set up a champagne bar in the grand foyer, and invited over 100 guests. They invited the commercial bankers who had approved the fraudulent loan. They invited luxury realtors, local investors, and Evelyn's superficial circle of high society friends. They wanted to prove that they were visionaries. I didn't have to hire a private investigator to know what was happening inside my own home. Evelyn, desperate for social validation, documented the entire party on her public social media accounts. I sat in my wheelchair in the dim light of the nursing home, holding my tablet, and watched my children desecrate everything I had spent 40 years building. I watched a video of Marcus sitting in my custom leather reading chair in the library, holding a glass of expensive bourbon, laughing loudly with a group of investors. I watched Evelyn standing in the West Wing, my late wife's studio, tacking a massive glossy mood board to the wall, detailing exactly how she planned to gut the room and install commercial refrigeration units for her champagne lounge. But the most painful thing I saw wasn't the structural changes they were proposing. In the background of one of Evelyn's videos, I saw the large galvanized steel trash can sitting by the back door. Sticking out of the top of the trash can, carelessly crumpled and stained with spilled wine, were several rolls of heavy blue paper. They were my original hand-drawn blueprints. The blueprints I had drawn at the kitchen table while Margaret was pregnant with Marcus. The blueprints I had used to reinforce the foundation so the house would be safe for them to grow up in. Marcus and Evelyn hadn't just thrown away paper. They had thrown away the physical evidence of my labor. They wanted a blank slate, and they didn't care what they had to destroy to get it. Later in the evening, Evelyn posted a live broadcast of the formal toast. The camera panned across the crowded grand foyer. Waiters in black ties circulated with silver trays of hors d'oeuvre. The guests were dressed in designer suits and evening gowns, nodding in polite admiration as they looked around the stunning Victorian interior that I had restored. Marcus stood on the landing of the main staircase, tapping a silver spoon against his champagne glass to quiet the crowd. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Marcus began, flashing his practiced salesman smile. He gestured expansively to the walls around him. "As many of you know, this property has been in our family for decades. My father, well, he loved this old house." Marcus paused, adopting an expression of fake, solemn sympathy that made me want to throw my tablet against the wall. "Unfortunately, Dad's health has taken a severe turn." Marcus lied smoothly to the crowd. "He is currently in full-time palliative care, and he won't be returning to the property." But Evelyn and I didn't want this beautiful estate to just sit here and rot. He took a sip of his champagne, his smile returning, wider and more arrogant than before. "Dad always loved buildings, but he never understood scale," Marcus continued, drawing a polite chuckle from a few of the bankers in the room. "He treated this place like a private museum. But Evelyn and I see the potential. We're taking his little passion project and turning it into a real, scalable business. We are going to bring the Whitmore house into the 21st century." The crowd applauded. Marcus handed the imaginary microphone over to Evelyn. Evelyn stepped forward, wearing a designer dress paid for by the fraudulent construction loan. She looked out at the crowd, her eyes shining with absolute narcissism. "When Marcus and I took over the estate," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with false humility, "we found a house that was stuck in the past. We found rooms that were locked away, serving no purpose other than nostalgia." She was talking about her mother's studio. "But sometimes," Evelyn declared, delivering the line she had undoubtedly rehearsed in the mirror all week, "honoring the past means not letting it control the future." We are so excited to share our vision for the Evelyn House estate venue with all of you. The crowd erupted into applause again. They raised their glasses to the new, visionary owners of the estate. They didn't know they were toasting to a pair of felons. They didn't know that the visionary owners were currently burning through a massive commercial loan secured by a document that was entirely legally fraudulent. And they certainly didn't know that the frail, incapacitated old man they were pitying was currently sitting in a nursing home, finalizing the paperwork to obliterate their entire investment. I closed the social media app. The screen of the tablet went black, reflecting my tired, lined face in the dark room. I heard a soft knock at the door. Elena walked in, carrying a small tray with my evening medication and a fresh cup of hot tea. She stopped at the foot of my bed, noticing the glowing tablet resting on my lap and the hard, unblinking expression on my face. "I'm sorry, Mr. Whitmore. Am I interrupting?" Elena asked quietly. She walked over and gently placed the tray on the nightstand. As she set the tea down, she caught a glimpse of the paused video on the screen. Marcus and Evelyn standing on the grand staircase, raising their champagne glasses to the cheering crowd. Elena looked at the screen, then looked at me, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Are those your children?" she asked hesitantly. She knew I had children. She knew they were the ones who had dumped me in this facility and refused to pay for my physical therapy. Seeing them dressed in designer clothes, throwing a lavish party while I sat in a bleach-scented room, clearly unsettled her. I looked at the frozen image of Marcus and Evelyn on the tablet. I looked at the absolute arrogance in their eyes, the complete lack of remorse for the man they had discarded. "No," I said, my voice dropping to a low, icy whisper that seemed to lower the temperature in the small room. "Those are my beneficiaries." Elena didn't say anything else. She didn't offer any empty platitudes. She just nodded slowly, adjusted my blankets to make sure I was warm, and quietly left the room. I picked up the tablet one last time. Marcus and Evelyn thought they had won. They thought the launch party was the beginning of their new, glamorous lives. They had handed out glossy brochures. They had courted investors. They had publicly staked their entire professional reputations on the successful redevelopment of the Whitmore house. They were so busy measuring the rooms for profit, they forgot to check the structural integrity of their own lies. Tomorrow morning, Samuel Price was coming to the nursing home, and tomorrow afternoon, my children were going to learn a very painful lesson about the physics of a collapsing building. At 9 o'clock the next morning, the sterile, depressing routine of the Shady Pines Rehabilitation Center was interrupted by a very expensive arrival. Samuel Price walked through the sliding glass doors of the facility, wearing a charcoal gray tailored suit. Carrying a thick leather briefcase, he wasn't alone. He brought a notary public and a highly respected, independent neurologist he had hired from a private hospital across town. Brenda, the facility manager, tried to stop them at the front desk, citing the visitor restrictions Marcus had placed on my file. Samuel didn't even slow down. He simply handed her a federal injunction preventing the facility from blocking my legal counsel and kept walking until he reached my room. The next hour was a masterclass in legal and medical precision. The neurologist conducted a rigorous, comprehensive cognitive capacity evaluation. He asked me about my medical history, my financial assets, current events, and the exact legal implications of revoking a power of attorney. I answered every question with the sharp, unyielding clarity of a man who had spent 50 years memorizing complex structural engineering codes. At the end of the evaluation, the doctor nodded, pulled a pen from his pocket, and signed a sworn, notarized medical affidavit. I was officially, legally, and undeniably declared 100% cognitively competent. With that single signature, the fraudulent foundation Marcus and Evelyn had built their entire scheme upon completely evaporated. Samuel opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. "The trap is set, Henry," Sam, his voice dropping to a low, businesslike hum as he laid the paperwork out on my rolling tray table. First, we execute the formal revocation of the springing power of attorney. This invalidates their legal authority immediately. I picked up the pen and signed my name. It didn't look shaky or weak. It looked like the signature of a senior architect finalizing a massive contract. Next, Sam continued, sliding a second document forward. We file a notice of title fraud with the county clerk and a direct fraud alert to the commercial lender. This will instantly freeze the $1.2 million construction line. The bank will realize they issued a commercial loan against an asset that was pledged using a fraudulent medical evaluation. What happens to the $350,000 they already withdrew? I asked. Sam smiled, a cold, predatory expression crossing his face. That's the beauty of commercial lending, Henry. To secure the construction line, Marcus and Evelyn had to sign a personal guarantee. Because the underlying collateral, the house, is now legally contested and untouchable due to fraud, the bank will immediately accelerate the loan. Your children are now personally, financially liable for the entire amount they withdrew. They owe the bank $350,000, payable immediately. I nodded slowly. The financial guillotine was primed. And finally, Sam said, taking a deep breath and pulling a thick legal-size contract from the bottom of his briefcase, the sale. He placed the contract on the table. The buyer listed on the document was *Briggs Land Clearing and Development. They are a commercial redevelopment firm, Sam explained. They are willing to pay $3 million in cash for the property, as is. They don't care about the Victorian architecture. They don't care about Evelyn's champagne lounge. They are buying the 2 acres of dirt underneath the house to build a high-end medical care facility. But to close the deal, the property must be delivered entirely cleared of existing structures. Sam looked at me carefully, making sure I understood the gravity of what I was about to do. If you sign this, Henry, they aren't going to remodel the house, Sam warned gently. They are going to destroy it. Standing near the door of my room was a man wearing a canvas jacket and heavy work boots. It was Nolan Briggs, the foreman of the demolition company. He had come to finalize the timeline. Nolan stepped forward, holding a yellow hard hat. Mr. Whitmore, I reviewed the structural blueprints your lawyer sent over. It's a beautiful house, a real piece of history. Are you absolutely sure you want the structure removed? I looked at Nolan, I looked at Sam, and then I looked down at the tablet resting on my bed, where Evelyn's marketing brochure was still open. I looked at the digital rendering of the champagne lounge, built directly over the footprint of the room where my wife used to paint hydrangeas. The structure is not what I am saving, Mr. Briggs, I said quietly. I took the pen and wrote one final, handwritten addendum at the bottom of the sales contract. The east garden is not to be touched. The hydrangeas must remain intact. I signed my name next to the addendum, finalizing the sale of the Whitmore house. We are done here, I told Sam, handing him the paperwork. Sam gathered the documents, a look of profound respect on his face. He packed them neatly into his briefcase. Nolan Briggs shook my hand, his rough calluses reminding me of the men I used to manage on massive construction sites. We'll move the heavy equipment in this afternoon, Mr. Whitmore, Nolan promised. As Sam turned to leave, I stopped him. Sam, there is one more thing, I said. Sam paused, his hand on the doorknob. What is it, Henry? There is a night nurse who works in this facility, I said, my voice softening just a fraction. Her name is Elena Ruiz. She is the only person in this building who remembered I was a human being before she knew I had any money. I want you to find out exactly what she owes in student loans. Sam raised an eyebrow. I can run a background check. It shouldn't take long. When you find the number, I want you to establish an anonymous scholarship fund through the firm, I instructed. I want her balance paid in full by the end of the week. But it must be entirely anonymous. She cannot know it came from me. Why anonymous? Sam asked gently. Because Elena cares about people for free, I replied. If she knows I paid her, she'll feel obligated to me. I don't want to buy her loyalty. I just want to remove the weight from her shoulders. Sam nodded, a soft smile touching his lips. I'll take care of it, Henry. He opened the door and walked out, leaving me alone in the quiet nursing home room. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 10:30 in the morning. Marcus and Evelyn's restoration launch party was scheduled to reach its peak at noon. They had a full house of investors, bankers, and high society friends currently drinking champagne in my foyer, toasting to their brilliant future. They thought they had inherited a kingdom. They didn't know the wrecking ball was already on the highway. At noon, the restoration launch party at the Whitmore house was at its absolute peak. Through the open French doors of the grand foyer, the sound of a string quartet drifted across the manicured front lawn. Waiters circulated with silver trays of champagne. Marcus was standing near the custom mahogany banister I'd restored with my own hands 30 years ago, holding court with a group of commercial real estate investors. Evelyn was taking photographs in front of a massive floral arrangement she had specifically ordered to match the branding of her new lifestyle venue. They were surrounded by wealth, validation, and the intoxicating illusion of their own success. Then, cutting through the delicate notes of the string quartet and the polite laughter of the high society guests, came a sound that did not belong at a luxury launch party. Beep. Beep, it was the harsh, rhythmic, inescapable sound of a heavy commercial backup alarm. The conversation in the foyer began to falter. Guests turned their heads toward the open doors, frowning in confusion. Marcus stopped mid-sentence, his arrogant smile faltering as the mechanical roar of massive diesel engines suddenly overpowered the music. Rolling slowly up the quarter-mile circular driveway of the estate was a convoy of heavy industrial machinery. Leading the pack was a massive 30-ton yellow bulldozer. Behind it was a flatbed truck carrying a hydraulic excavator, followed by 3 heavy-duty dump trucks and a fleet of white pickup trucks bearing the bold black logo, *Briggs Land Clearing and Development. The convoy didn't stop at the gates. They drove directly onto the pristine front lawn, the massive treads of the bulldozer tearing deep, muddy trenches into the perfectly manicured grass. Panic rippled through the guests. Women in designer dresses backed away from the windows. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. Marcus slammed his champagne glass down on a table and stormed out the front doors, his face flushed with furious indignation. Evelyn followed close behind him, her heels clicking frantically against the limestone steps. "Hey! What the hell do you think you're doing?" Marcus screamed, waving his arms as he marched toward the lead pickup truck. "Shut those engines off, you're tearing up the lawn." Who the hell called a demolition crew? Nolan Briggs stepped out of the lead truck. He was wearing a hard hat, a high-visibility vest, and carrying a metal clipboard. He didn't look intimidated by Marcus's expensive suit or the crowd of wealthy guests staring in horror from the porch. "I am Marcus Whitmore, the CEO of this property," Marcus shouted, stepping directly into Nolan's path. "I demand you get these machines off my estate right now." Nolan looked at his clipboard, then looked back at Marcus' absolute indifference. "We are not here for landscaping." "Buddy," Nolan said, his voice easily carrying over the idling diesel engines. "We're here for the scheduled structural removal." Evelyn let out a sharp gasp, stepping forward. "Structural removal? This is private property. We are hosting a commercial launch event. I will call the police and have every single one of you arrested for trespassing." Nolan tapped his clipboard with a thick, calloused finger. "Not according to the closing package, lady. The property was sold this morning. We are the new owners." "That is a lie," Marcus roared, completely losing his temper. "It is a legal fact, Marcus." The voice didn't come from Nolan Briggs. It came from the driveway behind the heavy machinery. A sleek black sedan had pulled up behind the dump trucks. Samuel Price stepped out, buttoning his charcoal gray suit jacket. He carried his thick leather briefcase and walked with the calm, terrifying authority of a man who was holding a royal flush. Marcus stared at the estate lawyer, his anger suddenly giving way to a flicker of genuine confusion. "Sam, what are you doing here?" "I am executing my client's legal directives," Samuel replied. Walking up to the front steps where the crowd of guests had gathered, he turned to face Marcus and Evelyn, his voice projecting clearly so every banker and investor in the crowd could hear him. "Mr. Whitmore sold this property at 8:30 this morning." Marcus let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "Our father is in a nursing home, Sam. He's incapacitated. He can't sell anything." "He doesn't even know what day it is." Samuel didn't smile. He just stared at Marcus with absolute disgust. "That was your mistake, Marcus," Samuel said quietly, the words slicing through the tense silence of the lawn. "Weak legs do not cancel a clear mind." Evelyn panicked. She realized the legal firewall they had built was suddenly crumbling. "We have power of attorney," she screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. "We have the legal right to manage this estate. You can't just sell it out from under us." Samuel stopped walking. He stood 10 feet away from my children, opened his briefcase, and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. "You had a conditional instrument, Evelyn," Samuel corrected her, his voice turning ice-cold. "You used it without the condition being met. You forged a medical evaluation to declare a competent man incapacitated so you could steal his home. That is not authority. That is evidence." A wave of shocked whispers erupted from the crowd of guests on the porch. The commercial banker who had approved the $1.2 million construction line suddenly pushed his way to the front of the crowd, his face completely pale. Marcus realized he was losing the narrative. He tried to physically intimidate Samuel, stepping forward, "You arrogant." Before Marcus could finish the threat, a specialized medical transport van pulled into the driveway, parking directly behind Samuel's sedan. The side doors slid open. The hydraulic lift lowered to the ground. I stepped off the lift. I wasn't in a wheelchair. I was leaning heavily on a black carbon fiber cane, and every step I took sent a jolt of pain up my spine, but I was walking. Beside me, wearing her blue scrubs and holding a medical support belt just in case I stumbled, was Elena. The entire estate went dead silent. The only sound was the low, steady rumble of the 30-ton bulldozer idling on the grass. I walked slowly up the driveway, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes, until I stood directly beside Samuel. I looked at the massive crowd of wealthy guests. I looked at the beautiful Victorian house I had poured my soul into. And then I looked at my children. Marcus looked like he had seen a ghost. His jaw was hanging open, his eyes wide with absolute terror. Evelyn covered her mouth with both hands, stepping backward until her spine hit the brick pillar of the front porch. "Dad," Marcus choked out, his voice trembling as the reality of his situation finally crushed him. He tried to pivot, desperately attempting to play the victim in front of the crowd. "Dad, what are you doing? We were protecting your assets. We were preserving your legacy." "No, Marcus," I said, my voice low and dangerous, carrying the weight of a falling steel beam. "You were monetizing my absence." Evelyn burst into tears. It wasn't genuine remorse. It was the panicked crying of a narcissist who had just been caught. "Dad, please!" Evelyn sobbed, gesturing wildly at the heavy machinery. "This is our family home. You can't let them destroy it. Mom would have hated this." I looked at Evelyn. I thought about the digital blueprints on my tablet. I thought about the champagne lounge. "Your mother planted flowers, Evelyn," I said softly, the absolute heartbreak in my voice silencing the entire crowd. "You planned a champagne lounge over her studio." I turned my head and pointed my carbon fiber cane toward the galvanized steel trash can sitting near the side entrance of the house. "You threw away the drawings before you understood the design," I told them. Samuel Price stepped forward, handing a thick folder directly to the commercial banker who was standing frozen on the steps. Notice of title fraud, revocation of power of attorney, and a sworn medical affidavit of capacity, Samuel informed the banker loudly. The collateral securing your $1.2 million construction line is legally void. However, because Marcus and Evelyn Whitmore signed personal guarantees to secure the first draw of $350,000, they are now personally, individually liable for the immediate repayment of that debt. Marcus stumbled backward as if he had been physically punched in the chest. He owed the bank $350,000, and he no longer had a house to sell to cover it. He was bankrupt. He was ruined. Nolan Briggs walked over to me, holding out his metal clipboard and a pen. "Mr. Whitmore," Nolan said respectfully, glancing at the terrified crowd on the porch. "The site is secured. Do we proceed?" Marcus fell to his knees on the muddy grass, ruining his expensive suit. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, completely stripped of his arrogance. "Dad, please," Marcus begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate whine. "We can fix this. Just give us time. We can fix the foundation." I looked down at my son. I looked at the boy who had once run toy cars across the hardwood floors I had installed. I looked at the man who had left me in a bleach-scented room for 42 days. "That is what people say," I replied quietly. Taking the pen from Nolan, after ignoring every warning on the blueprint, I signed the demolition order. Nolan raised his hand and gave a sharp, two-finger whistle to the operator sitting in the cab of the 30-ton bulldozer. The operator engaged the gears. The massive engine roared, belching a cloud of black diesel smoke into the clear afternoon sky. The guests screamed, scrambling backward off the porch and running toward the driveway. The bulldozer rolled forward, its massive steel blade lowering toward the earth. It didn't drive into the main house. It drove directly toward the brand-new, gaudy sunroom extension Evelyn had just spent $50,000 of stolen loan money building onto the side of the grand foyer. The steel blade hit the brick and glass structure with a deafening, catastrophic crunch. Wood splintered, glass shattered into a million pieces. The pristine, luxury facade of the Whitmore House restoration launch collapsed into a massive pile of rubble and white dust. Marcus screamed, burying his face in the mud. Evelyn collapsed onto the steps, weeping hysterically as the physical manifestation of her fake luxury lifestyle was crushed into dirt. My children thought the house was their inheritance. That afternoon, they learned it was evidence with walls. The demolition of the Whitmore house did not happen all at once. The bulldozer smashed the new decorative sunroom and tore the front porch off the foundation, leaving the interior of the house exposed to the open air like a giant, shattered dollhouse. It took 3 days for the Briggs land clearing crew to completely level the structure. But it took less than 24 hours to completely level my children's lives. The social and financial fallout from the launch party was catastrophic. As soon as the bank realized they had issued a $1.2 million commercial line of credit against a fraudulently secured asset, they froze all associated accounts. Because Marcus and Evelyn had signed personal guarantees to authorize the initial $350,000 draw, the bank didn't just walk away. They accelerated the debt. Marcus was legally mandated to repay the $350,000 immediately. Because he had already spent most of the money trying to float his failing real estate business, he defaulted. His business accounts were seized, his personal assets were liquidated, and the State Real Estate Commission opened a formal investigation into his licensing due to the forged medical capacity documents. Marcus wasn't just bankrupt, he was radioactive. No investor in the city would ever work with him again. Evelyn's fate was arguably worse because her punishment was entirely social. The high society friends she had invited to the launch party had witnessed the entire humiliation firsthand. A video of Evelyn screaming on the front steps, crying about her champagne lounge while I pointed out she had built it over her dead mother's studio, circulated rapidly through her country club circle. Her nascent interior design brand was annihilated overnight. She was sued by the catering company, sued by the event planners, and blacklisted by every luxury venue in the state. She had desperately wanted to be famous. Instead, she became a cautionary tale. Even the Shady Pines Rehabilitation Center didn't escape the blast radius. My lawyer, Samuel Price, filed a massive, meticulously documented complaint with the state medical board regarding the facility's administrative practices. Brenda Cole, the pragmatic manager who had defended Marcus's decision to deny my physical therapy, was placed under immediate audit for accepting a patient under a fraudulent rehabilitation code. I didn't stay at Shady Pines long enough to see Brenda get fired. 2 days after the demolition, Samuel arranged for my transfer to a high-end, luxury, coastal assisted living residence. It was the kind of place Marcus and Evelyn could have easily afforded if they hadn't been so greedy. My new suite had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean, a private drafting desk, and a state-of-the-art hydrotherapy pool where I received daily intensive physical therapy. But before I left Shady Pines, I had one final piece of business to conclude. On my last morning at the facility, I was sitting in my wheelchair near the front lobby, waiting for the medical transport van. Elena ran through the sliding glass doors. She was out of breath, wearing her street clothes, having clearly rushed to the facility on her day off. She was clutching a piece of heavy embossed paper in her hand. She stopped in front of my wheelchair, her chest heaving, tears streaming down her face. She held up the letter. It was on official law firm letterhead, bearing Samuel Price's signature. Mr. Whitmore. Elena choked out, her voice trembling so hard she could barely form the words. I got this letter in the mail this morning. It says an anonymous academic scholarship fund just paid off my entire student loan balance. All $82,000. I looked at the letter. I looked back at her, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. That is wonderful news, Elena, I said calmly. Congratulations. She shook her head, dropping to her knees in front of my wheelchair so she was at eye level with me. She grabbed my hand, holding my rough, calloused fingers in both of hers. It was you, she cried, the tears spilling over her eyelashes. I know it was you. You saw my laptop that night. You're the only person who knew exactly how much I owed. I gently squeezed her hand. Anonymous people are very difficult to cross-examine, Elena, I said softly, offering her a small, knowing smile. She let out a wet laugh, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I don't know how to thank you. I don't know how I can ever repay this. You already did, I told her, my voice turning serious. You cared before you knew there was anything to gain. You treated me like a human being when the people who shared my blood treated me like a broken piece of furniture. That kind of decency is rarer than money. Go finish your advanced certifications, be a good nurse, and don't ever let anyone make you feel small again. The transport van honked outside. Elena stood up, hugged me tightly, and helped the driver wheel me out to the vehicle. It was the only time in 42 days I felt genuinely cared for. 3 months later, my physical therapy had progressed to the point where I could walk short distances with my carbon fiber cane. I was sitting at the drafting desk in my luxury coastal suite, sketching a new pavilion for the residence's garden, when there was a knock at my door. I didn't have to look up to know who it was. The front desk had called ahead. Marcus and Evelyn walked into the suite. They looked terrible. Marcus had lost weight, the stress of bankruptcy carving deep, ugly lines into his face. He was wearing a cheap, off-the-rack jacket. Evelyn looked exhausted, her hair pulled back in a messy knot, entirely stripped of the designer cashmere and expensive jewelry she used to flaunt. They stood near the doorway, looking around the massive, sunlit suite, realizing that the inheritance they had tried to steal was currently paying for my perfect retirement. "Dad," Marcus said quietly, his voice hollow. He stepped forward, wringing his hands nervously. We wanted to come see you. We wanted to apologize. I kept drawing. I didn't look up from the vellum. We made a mistake, Dad. Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking. We were stressed about money. The business was failing. We panicked. We made a terrible mistake, and we are so sorry. I carefully laid my mechanical pencil down on the desk. I turned my chair around to face them. No, Marcus, I said coldly. A mistake is drawing a window too narrow. A mistake is calculating the wrong load-bearing limit for a steel beam. You didn't make a mistake. You forged a medical document. You locked me in a miserable room. You drew me out of my own life. Evelyn started to cry, wrapping her arms around herself. You destroyed our inheritance, Dad, Evelyn sobbed, the selfish entitlement still buried deep in her core despite her ruin. You destroyed the house we grew up in. You didn't have to tear it down. I didn't destroy anything, Evelyn, I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of pity. I removed a structure that had become unsafe. I turned my chair back to my drafting desk and picked up my pencil. The door is behind you, I told them. Close it on your way out. They stood there for a long moment, waiting for a reprieve that was never going to come. Finally, I heard the soft, heavy click of the door closing. I was alone again, but for the first time in years, the air felt completely clean. In the end, the Whitmore house came down exactly the way every failing structure does. It didn't collapse all at once. It didn't collapse because of a single crack in the drywall or a leaky pipe in the basement. It collapsed because the people living inside it kept pretending the foundation was fine, right up until the wrecking ball swung through the front door. Before I go, I want to know what you think. If you were Henry, would you've saved the $3 million house and only punished Marcus and Evelyn through the legal system? Was destroying a beautiful piece of architecture a step too far? Or do you agree with Henry? Did his children lose the right to inherit that house the exact moment they left their father in a nursing home and started measuring his rooms for profit? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I read every single one, and I know this is a story that hits close to home for a lot of families. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you on the next one.